My father kicked me out of the family business because I refused to sell my grandpa's inheritance. In Oceanside, Southern California, where the Pacific kisses the shore every morning, I was just another construction worker with callous hands and faded dreams. My name's Zach, 31 years old, and until last year, I was a family disappointment. The guy who couldn't measure up to his golden boy brother. Funny how life changes when everyone stops believing in you. I've always been the square peg in the round hole of my family. Dad built Russell Construction from nothing into a mid-sized company that handles commercial projects all across SoCal. My older brother Tom runs operations now, wearing tailored suits and dropping business buzzwords like they're worth something. Me? I'm the guy who shows up in work boots, manages the actual crews, and gets dirt under my fingernails. Tom got the corner office. I got the job site trailer. My fiancée Liz, a real estate agent with perfectly manicured nails and a 5-year plan, spent most of our 4-year relationship trying to fix me. She'd roll her eyes whenever I'd put on my Elvis records or mention Grandpa's stories. You're 31, Zach. When are you going to grow out of this 1950s obsession? She'd say, flipping through a home design magazine while I played Jailhouse Rock for the 100th time. The only person who ever really got me was Grandpa Frank. At 78, he was more alive than most people half his age. Weathered face cracked with laugh lines, voice like gravel stirred in whiskey, and stories that could make a statue leaning closer. He lived in a modest house just 2 blocks from the beach, where he'd spent his life as a commercial fisherman before retiring to become the neighborhood's resident sea sage. But Grandpa's real treasure wasn't his house. It was his boat, a 1950s Chris Craft Catalina that he bought when he was my age. 30 feet of teakwood beauty with leather seats worn smooth by decades of salty adventures. Everyone else saw an old boat taking up space at the marina. I saw a time machine. That boat was Grandpa's heart floating on water. The brass railings gleamed like they were polished yesterday. The wooden deck had stories written into every grain. And the wheelhouse, man, that wheelhouse was something else. An old record player mounted in a custom cabinet played Elvis, Buddy Holly, and the Drifters while Grandpa steered us through the waves. This wheel right here, he'd say, hands caressing the polish with the steering wheel. This is the key to freedom, Zach. Remember that. Some of my earliest memories are on that boat. When I was 8, Grandpa taught me how to fish from the stern. I was terrible at it. Impatient, clumsy, constantly tangling the line. After my 3rd failed cast, I threw down the rod in frustration. The fish aren't cooperating today, I mumbled, embarrassed by my own failure. Grandpa just laughed that sandpaper laugh of his and sat down beside me. Zach, life is like the ocean, he said, looking out the horizon where the blue met the sky. Sometimes it's calm, sometimes it storms, but the important thing is to keep your hand on the wheel. I didn't understand what he meant back then. Now, those words are tattooed on my heart. Last month, our family gathered for Dad's birthday dinner at some overpriced steakhouse in La Jolla. Mom spent the whole time updating everyone on Tom's latest accomplishments. His new beach house, his promotion, his girlfriend's fashion line. When it came my turn to share news, I mentioned I was thinking about restoring an old boat someday. Dad's face hardened. Daydreaming doesn't pay the mortgage, Zach. Where do you ever get serious about your future? Liz nodded in agreement. Honey, you're stuck in the 1950s. We need to think about reality. Our wedding, a house, building something real. Every word felt like another brick in the wall between us. I excused myself before dessert arrived and drove straight to Grandpa's. I didn't even call first. I never had to. His door was always open for me. We sat on his boat that night, moored in its slip at the marina, drinking cold beers as the sun dipped below the horizon. The record player crooned Elvis's Can't Help Falling in Love, while Grandpa told me about the summer of '62, when he took Grandma up the coast to Santa Barbara. She was wearing a yellow dress, he recalled, eyes misting over. When we anchored in that little cove north of the harbor, she looked like sunshine itself against the blue water. That's the thing about Grandpa. He remembered details that mattered, not stock prices or business deals, but the color of a dress against a sunset, the way light caught on water, The perfect song for a perfect moment. These people with their fancy cars and big houses, he said, gesturing vaguely toward the luxury yachts across the marina. Most of them can't tell you what color the horizon was this morning. What kind of rich is that? The next morning, I called in sick to work and spent the day helping Grandpa varnish the boat's trim. We worked in comfortable silence, occasionally breaking into whistle tunes or shared jokes. Around noon, he looked up from his work with that mischievous grin of his. "If I die, Zach, don't let them sell my boat," he said, wiping his hands on a rag. "This old girl's going to play on Broadway someday." I laughed it off. Grandpa was always making weird predictions that made no sense. He once claimed my 5th grade science project would end up in a museum. It didn't. It caught fire and nearly burned down the garage. But that was Grandpa, full of wild optimism and strange prophecies. "Sure thing, Captain," I replied, mock saluting. "Broadway it is." 3 days later, Grandpa had a massive heart attack while buying fishing tackle at the marina store. By the time the ambulance arrived, he was gone. Just like that, mid-sentence, mid-life, mid-story. The paramedics said it was quick. He probably didn't feel much pain. As if that made it any easier. The funeral was intimate but beautiful. The church smelled of sea salt and flowers. Mom cried quietly. Dad stood stoic, his grief locked behind his businessman's mask. Tom delivered a polished eulogy about legacy and values. When my turn came, I could only manage a choke story about fishing lessons and Elvis records before my voice gave out completely. Someone played "Can't Help Falling in Love" as they lowered him into the ground. I didn't cry then. It felt like the ocean had swallowed all my tears. A week later, we gathered at the attorney's office for the reading of the will. Dad got the house, which made sense. He'd been helping with Grandpa's mortgage for years. Mom received Grandma's jewelry. Tom got the vintage car Grandpa had been restoring. When the attorney announced I'd inherited the boat, my brother actually snorted. "What's Zach going to do with that money, Pitt?" Dad shook his head. "That thing costs more to maintain than it's worth. Sell it and put the money towards something practical." Even Mom, still dabbing her eyes, murmured something about getting something useful out of the inheritance. Liz squeezed my hand in what I think was meant to be encouragement. "We could use the money for our wedding fund," she whispered. "That leaky tub must be worth something to a collector." They all talk about the boat like it was junk, a burden Grandpa had saddled me with rather than the greatest gift I'd ever received. None of them understood. None of them ever would. Sometimes the most valuable things in life are the ones others think are worthless. Grandpa had told me once while we were polishing the boat's brass fittings. At the time, I thought he was just being philosophical. Now I realized he was preparing me. After the meeting, I drove straight to the marina. The sunset painted the water orange and gold as I climbed aboard Grandpa's, my boat. The familiar creak of the deck beneath my feet sounded like a welcome. The lingering scent of wood polish and salt air wrapped around me like Grandpa's embrace. I sat at the wheel, running my fingers over the smooth where his hands had rested countless times. In the wheelhouse, I found his old captain's hat hanging on a hook. I put it on, feeling foolish and sacred all at once. The record player still held the Elvis album we'd listened to on our last day together. I switched it on, and Hound Dog crackled through the speakers. As the music filled the cabin, something inside me broke open. Tears rolled down my face, but for the first time since Grandpa died, I felt something besides grief, a tiny spark of purpose, flickering to life in the darkness. "I'll keep her afloat, Grandpa," I whispered to the empty boat that somehow still felt full of his presence. "I promise." As I sat there, watching stars appear above the marina, I realized something that would change the course of my life. Everyone else saw a dying relic, but I saw something beautiful, something worth saving, something that could save me too. Maybe Grandpa knew that all along. Maybe that's why, out of everyone, he chose me. The 2 weeks after inheriting Grandpa's boat were a blur of grief and determination. I spent every evening after work at the marina, just sitting on the boat, learning its sounds and moods. Sometimes I'd play Elvis records and drink a beer, imagining Grandpa sitting across from me with that crooked smile of his. Other times I just listened to the gentle rocking of the hull against the dock, finding comfort in the rhythm. My relationship with Liz grew increasingly strained. She'd expected me to immediately list a boat with a broker, cash out, and move on with our real-life plans. When I mentioned wanting to keep it, her frustration morphed into outright hostility. "You can't afford the slip fees alone, Zach," she said one night as we ate takeout Chinese in our small apartment. "Never mind the maintenance costs. That thing is a money pit." Maybe she was right. The annual marina fees were steep, and the boat needed work. Lots of it. The engine required servicing. Some of the teak decking had begun to splinter, and the electrical system was outdated. But every time I considered selling, I heard Grandpa's voice in my head. "This old girl's going to play on Broadway someday." November rolled around, bringing with it the annual Russell family Thanksgiving dinner. In Southern California, Thanksgiving doesn't have the snow covered. Fireplace aesthetic you see in movies, but my mom always compensated with excessive decorations. Leaf garlands draped over every surface, turkey-shaped centerpieces, and pumpkin-spiced everything. This year's gathering felt particularly tense, like the calm before a storm. Our family traditions had always been important to us. Mom would spend days preparing the turkey and sides. Dad would carve the bird with surgical precision, and we'd all pretend to be a picture-perfect American family for exactly 1 day per year. This time, however, I could feel something different hanging in the air as we sat down to eat. Mom had outdone herself. Turkey with all the fixings, 3 types of pie, and enough sides to feed an army. The first half hour passed in relative peace as we filled our plates and exchanged superficial pleasantries. Then, as if following some predetermined script, Dad cleared his throat and leaned forward. "So, Zach, have you decided what you'll do with Frank's boat yet?" he asked, his voice carrying that business-like tone he reserved for discussions about my future. I took a slow sip of water, trying to buy time. "I'm keeping it." The silence that followed was deafening. Tom shot a look at Dad. Liz stiffened beside me, and Mom suddenly became very interested in rearranging the cranberry sauce on her plate. "That doesn't make financial sense," Dad replied, setting down his fork with a finality that signaled the beginning of a lecture. "I've got a buyer lined up who's willing to give you $50,000 for it. That's generous considering its condition." My jaw clenched. "You've been shopping my inheritance around without talking to me?" "I'm trying to help you," Dad countered, his patience clearly wearing thin. "That $50,000 could be invested in the company. I'd match it, give you a proper stake in the business. It's time you started thinking about your future, Zach. Translation, it's time you became more like Tom." My brother, always a diplomat when it came to family tensions, jumped in with his typical big brother wisdom. "Look, Zach, no one's saying you can't honor Grandpa's memory. But maybe the way to do that isn't by throwing good money after bad. Sell the boat, buy yourself a decent suit, and finally start acting like an adult." The cranberry sauce I'd been enjoying suddenly tasted like ash. I looked around the table, realizing with a sickening clarity that they'd planned this ambush. The perfectly timed comments, the pre-lined-up buyer, the united front. This wasn't a discussion. It was an intervention. Liz placed her hand on my arm in that patronizing way people do when they think you're being unreasonable. "Honey, we've been talking about putting a down payment on a house. This could be our chance." "We've been talking?" I echoed. "Or you've been talking and assuming I'd fall in line?" The tension in the room thickened as everyone exchanged uncomfortable glances. I could feel the weight of their disapproval pressing down on me from all sides. These were the people who were supposed to love me unconditionally. Yet here they were, trying to strip away the one thing that mattered to me. "That boat is more than just wood and fiberglass," I said quietly, my voice steadier than I felt inside. "It's everything Grandpa believed in." Dad shook his head, frustration evident in the tightening of his jaw, a trait I'd unfortunately inherited. "That boat is exactly like you, Zach. A drain on resources with no return on investment." The words hit like a physical blow. 20 years of feeling like the family disappointment crystallized in that single sentence. "Richard," Mom gasped, but the damage was done. I looked at my father, really looked at him, and for the first time, I saw him clearly. not as the intimidating figure who'd shaped my childhood, but as a man who measured everything, including his sons, by their market value. Liz squeezed my arm harder, her acrylic nails digging into my skin. Zach, you need to be practical. It's me or that boat. I can't build a life with someone who throws away our future for a rotting piece of nostalgia. The ultimatum hung in the air like a thundercloud. In movies, this would be where the dramatic music swells, the moment of truth where the hero makes a stand. I looked around at my family. My dad's cold disapproval, my mother's nervous discomfort, Tom's smug superiority, and Liz's manipulative ultimatum. Then I thought about Grandpa Frank, who taught me that some things in life can't be measured on a balance sheet. You've never understood what that boat means to me, I said to Liz, my voice quiet but firm. None of you have. What I understand, Liz replied, her voice rising with frustration, is that you're choosing a heap of rotting wood over our relationship. I stood up, napkin falling to floor. No, I'm choosing to honor a promise to someone who believed in me over people who never have. The silence that followed was broken by the sound of Liz yanking her engagement ring off her finger. She placed it on the table with a small, definitive clink. Well, I hope you and your boat will be very happy together. With that, she grabbed her purse and walked out the front door. I remained standing, feeling strangely calm despite the chaos erupting around me. Mom was crying quietly. Tom was shaking his head in disgust, and Dad looked like I confirmed every disappointing thought he'd ever had about me. If you walk out that door after her, Dad said, his voice cold, don't bother coming back. You're no longer my son. 27 years of trying to earn his approval flashed before my eyes. 27 years of not quite good enough. And why can't you be more like your brother? 27 years of measuring myself against impossible standards. I walked out. The next few weeks passed in a whirlwind of change. Liz moved out of our apartment while I was at work, leaving behind only the things she considered too worthless to take, ironically including the vinyl record collection she'd always hated. Dad made good on his threat, informing me via a terse text message that my position at Russell Construction had been terminated. Just like that, I found myself jobless, homeless, since I couldn't afford the apartment on my own, and single, the American dream, in reverse. Some guys might have crawled back, apologized, compromised. Not me. Maybe it was stubbornness, maybe it was principle, or maybe it was just Grandpa Frank's blood running through my veins. I sold most of my furniture, packed my clothes and records into my old Jeep, and put the rest in a small storage unit. Then I did what any rational person would do. I moved onto the boat. Living on a boat sounds romantic until you actually try it. 30 feet feels a lot smaller when it's your entire world. The head, that's boat speak for bathroom, was cramped and temperamental. The galley kitchen had a 2-burner propane stove that scared me half to death every time I lit it. And everything, absolutely everything, was perpetually damp. But there were moments of unexpected beauty, too. Waking up to the gentle rocking of the waves. Drinking coffee on the deck as the marina came alive around me. Watching pelicans dive bomb for fish in the late afternoon sun. And most importantly, feeling Grandpa's presence in every creak and groan of the old wooden hull. With my savings rapidly dwindling, I picked up odd construction jobs, nothing permanent, just enough to cover the slip fees and put food in my stomach. I'd work during the day, then return to the boat at night, falling asleep to the sound of water lapping against wood and distant seagull cries. One particularly rough night, about 2 months after Thanksgiving, I sat on the deck under a blanket of stars, nursing a cheap beer and taking stock of my situation. I'd lost my family, my fiancée, my job, and my home, all for a boat that needed more work than I could afford and possessed more sentimental value than market value. Well, Grandpa, I said aloud to the night sky, laughing to the lump in my throat, I'm officially homeless. Hope you're proud of me up there. A warm breeze suddenly swept across the deck, ruffling my hair in a way that felt almost like an affectionate pat on the head. In that moment, as ridiculous as it sounds, I could have sworn I heard Grandpa's gravelly chuckle carried on the wind. My new living situation became something of a joke. I told easy awkwardness when people asked where I lived. My new address is a rusty boat in the middle of nowhere. I'd say with a self-deprecating smile. Mail doesn't get delivered, but the view is 5 stars. Sometimes, in the quiet hours before dawn when doubts crept in like the morning fog, I'd wonder if I'd made a terrible mistake. If I should have sold the boat, taken Dad's offer, married Liz, and followed the path of least resistance. It would have been easier, certainly. But as Grandpa used to say, the easy path and the right path rarely run side by side. December bled into January, and with the new year came new challenges. A particularly nasty winter storm hit the coast, sending waves crashing against the breakwater and rocking the boats in their slips like toys in a bathtub. I spent the night tightening mooring lines and bailing water, fighting to keep Grandpa's boat, my boat, safe from the elements. By morning, exhausted and soaked to the bone, I surveyed the damage. A section of the rail had splintered, the tarp covering the cockpit had torn free, and water had seeped into the cabin, soaking my mattress and some of my clothes. But the boat had weathered the storm. She was still floating, still fighting, just like me. As I stood there, watching the sun break through the clouds, a strange calm settled over me. I'd lost everything that most people would consider important: family, relationship, career, conventional home. Yet somehow, I felt more myself than I had in years. It was as if all those things had been weights holding me underwater, and now, finally, I could breathe. Sometimes, to find yourself, you have to lose everything else, I murmured, remembering how Grandpa had once said something similar after his own string of setbacks. Standing there in my soaking clothes, surrounded by the mess left by the storm, I understood what he meant in a way I never could have before. The marina manager stopped by later that day to check on everyone after the storm. He was an old friend of Grandpa's, a retired Navy guy named Mike with sun-weathered skin and hands like baseball mitts. "Frank will be proud of you, son," he said, surveying how I'd secured the boat. Not many would stick it out like this. Coming from Mike, who'd rarely offered praise in all the years I'd known him, those words meant everything. I'd lost my actual father's approval, but somehow gained it from the community of old salts and sea dogs who'd been Grandpa's chosen family. As January turned February, I settled into a rhythm of work and boat life. The initial romantic notions had faded, replaced by a pragmatic routine. I'd shower at the marina facilities, cook simple meals on the temperamental stove, and spend evenings making lists of repairs needed, ordered by urgency and cost. Living on the boat forced me to embrace minimalism in a way my previous life never had. Each item had to earn its place by being useful, durable, or deeply meaningful. My vinyl collection stayed, of course. Some things are non-negotiable, but most of my previous possessions remain in storage or have been sold off. There's something liberating about owning only what you truly need or love. Without the constant pressure to accumulate stuff, I found myself with more time, more mental space, and paradoxically, more contentment. Sure, I was technically homeless by conventional standards, but I'd never felt more at home than I did on that old boat, surrounded by Grandpa's memories and my own growing sense of purpose. On cold nights, I'd wrap myself in Grandpa's old wool blanket, pour a finger of the whiskey he left behind, and listen to the boat's gentle creaking. Sometimes I swore I could hear his voice in the sounds, encouraging me, guiding me, believing in me when no one else did. Maybe it was just grief playing tricks on my mind, or maybe there really was something of him left in the boat he loved so much. Either way, I wasn't alone out there on the water. I had my memories, my determination, and a stubborn boat that refused to sink. Much like its new captain, March in Southern California brought warmer days and a new sense of purpose. Living on the boat had gone from a desperate last resort to something resembling a lifestyle. I'd settled into routines. Morning coffee on deck, watching the sunrise, showers at the marina facilities, evenings spent planning my next moves. But the boat itself was still in rough shape, a daily reminder of promises unfulfilled. One morning, I woke up with unusual clarity. Instead of my typical routine of job searching and budget stretching, I pulled out a notepad and began listing everything that needed fixing on the boat. The list quickly spilled onto a second page, then a third. Engine overhaul, hull repairs, electrical rewiring, new upholstery, deck restoration. Each item represented hours of work and hundreds, sometimes thousands of dollars. Staring at that overwhelming list, I remembered something Grandpa used to say when faced with a daunting task. You can't eat an elephant in one bite, Zach. Just start with the tail and keep chewing. His peculiar wisdom never failed to make me laugh, but it held truth. I needed to start somewhere, anywhere, and keep moving forward. The deck seemed like the most logical place to begin. It was visibly damaged, letting water seep into the cabin during heavy rain, and I actually knew something about woodworking from my construction background. With the last of my savings, I bought several planks of teak wood from a specialty marine supplier, along with sandpaper, varnish, and the necessary tools. That first weekend of restoration work nearly broke me. Removing the damaged sections of decking proved more difficult than expected. The original builders had used techniques I wasn't familiar with, and every mistake felt like I was desecrating Grandpa's legacy. By Sunday evening, my hands were raw with blisters, my back screamed in protest, and I'd accomplished maybe a quarter of what I planned. I'm a builder, not a shipwright. I grumbled to myself, nursing my wounds with a cold beer. The irony wasn't lost on me. I'd spent years working construction, yet here I was, struggling with basic woodworking. Grandpa would have found it hilarious. Despite the frustration, there was something deeply satisfying about working on the boat. Each plank I successfully replaced felt like a small victory, a physical manifestation of my commitment. I started documenting my progress with before and after photos on my phone, partly to track improvements and partly to remind myself that I was actually accomplishing something when it felt like I was just spinning my wheels. About 2 weeks into the deck restoration, my old buddy Carter from a construction crew stopped by the marina to check on me. We hadn't spoken much since my dramatic exit from the family business, but he'd always been a good friend, more interested in loyalty than office politics. Dude, you should put this on YouTube, he said, scrolling through the photos on my phone. Seriously, people eat this restoration stuff up. I laughed it off. Who'd want to watch an amateur hack away at a boat? I barely know what I'm doing half the time. Carter gave me that look, the one that says I'm missing something obvious. That's exactly why they'd watch. It's relatable. Everyone loves an underdog story. He gestured expansively at the boat and my modest progress. You've got all the elements: vintage cool factor, personal story, trial and error. Trust me, this is content gold. I dismissed the idea initially. I wasn't looking for internet fame or validation from strangers. But that night, scrolling through my phone in the quiet of the cabin, I found myself watching restoration videos. People fixing up everything from rusty tools to classic cars, sharing their processes, mistakes and all. Carter was right. There was something compelling about watching something old and forgotten being brought back to life. With nothing to lose but my dignity, which was already in short supply, I set my phone on a tripod the next day and recorded myself working on the deck. I talked through what I was doing, joked about my mistakes, and shared bits of Grandpa's wisdom along the way. That evening, I edited the footage into a 15-minute video, titled it Rusty Boat and Idiot, Episode 1, and uploaded it to a freshly created YouTube channel. My expectations were rock bottom low. I figured maybe a few fellow boat enthusiasts might stumble across it, perhaps leave some advice in the comments. The next morning, I checked the video stats over breakfast. 37 views. Not exactly viral, but it was something. What surprised me were the comments. Finally, a restoration channel that shows the real struggle. Love the old Chris Craft. My grandpa had one just like it. The Elvis records in the background are perfect. Encouraged by the small positive response, I kept filming. Episode 2 focused on repairing the splintered rail that had broken during the storm. Episode 3 documented my first attempts at refinishing the cockpit controls. Each video included stories about Grandpa, snippets of 50s music, and plenty of self-deprecating humor about my limited skills. By the 6th video, something unexpected happened. The view count jumped from a few hundred to over 10,000, then 20,000, then 50. Comments flooded in faster than I could read them. People weren't just watching. They were subscribing, sharing, and engaging. One comment in particular stood out. This isn't just about restoring a boat. It's about restoring yourself. Keep going, man. That comment hit me like a wave. They were right. This wasn't just about fulfilling a promise to Grandpa anymore. Each plank I replaced, each fitting I polished, was rebuilding something in me too. For the first time in my life, I was doing something completely on my own terms, without trying to please my father or measure up to Tom. As the channel grew, viewers began sending tips, advice, and encouragement. Some even mailed vintage boat parts they'd lie around in garages and workshops. An older gentleman from Florida sent me original Chris Craft catalog pages from the 1950s. A retired shipwright from Maine recorded detailed tutorial videos specifically addressing problems I was facing. 3 months in, YouTube notified me that my channel qualified for monetization. I nearly fell off the boat when I saw the first month's earnings, just over $2,000. The second month brought in nearly $3,000. It wasn't wealth by any standard, but it was enough to cover marina fees, boat repairs, and basic living expenses. For the first time since Thanksgiving, I wasn't financially drowning. With actual income flowing in, I could finally afford quality materials and proper tools. The restoration picked up pace, and the boat gradually transformed from floating tetanus risk, as one commenter affectionately called it, to something that hinted at its former glory. The comment sections became a community of their own, viewers sharing restoration tips, 50s nostalgia, and stories about their own grandparents. One particularly beautiful Saturday morning in May, I decided to take a break from boat work. My hands needed a rest, and my brain needed a change of scenery. The Oceanside Harbor Farmers Market was just a short walk from the marina, a weekly gathering of local vendors selling everything from fresh produce to handmade crafts. I wandered through the market, enjoying the simple pleasure of being among people without the pressure of social expectations. Near the end of the row of stalls, something caught my eye, a small booth displaying watercolor paintings of vintage boats. But it wasn't the artwork that stopped me in my tracks, though it was impressive. It was the artist. She sat on a folding stool, brush in hand, adding details to a half-finished painting of what looked remarkably like a Chris Craft from the 50s. Dark hair pulled back in a loose ponytail, oversized denim shirt splattered with paint, and completely absorbed in her work. I stood there longer than was probably socially acceptable, watching her bring the boat to life with careful brushstrokes. Eventually, she looked up and caught me staring. Instead of the awkward moment I expected, she grinned and said something that felt like destiny. "You're that guy from YouTube with the Chris Craft, aren't you? Cool boat, but it definitely needs more varnish." Her name was Emily, 25 years old, with an art degree and an obsession with things that have soul, as she put it. She'd been painting vintage boats, cars, and buildings for 3 years, selling her work at local markets and online. And apparently, she'd been watching my videos since the beginning. "Your channel is refreshing," she told me as we shared coffee from a nearby stand. "Most restoration channels make everything look easy and perfect. Yours is real. Plus, anyone who plays Elvis while working on a 50s boat clearly has good taste." Emily was like no one I'd ever met, a fascinating blend of old soul and modern spirit. She wore vintage dresses with combat boots, quoted Elvis lyrics, but also knew every word to current songs, and spoke about old boats with the technical knowledge of someone who'd grown up around them. "My dad restored wooden sailboats," she explained. "I spent my childhood covered in sawdust and varnish. When other kids were playing with dolls, I was learning how to steam bend wood." No wonder she'd found my channel. No wonder she understood what that boat meant to me. We spent the entire day together. After the market closed, we walked along the harbor, talking about everything from boat restoration techniques to our favorite Elvis songs. She laughed at my jokes, even the terrible ones, and matched them with her own quirky humor. By sunset, it felt like I'd known her for years. As we stood watching the sun sink into the Pacific, Emily surprised me with an unexpected request. "Would you like to have dinner with my family tomorrow? Sunday dinners are kind of tradition, and my parents would love to meet the boat guy I've been talking about." Meeting someone's parents on what was essentially a first date seemed bizarrely old-fashioned, But so was everything else about this connection. Besides, after a month of isolation, the idea of a family dinner, even someone else's family, held immense appeal. Emily's family home was exactly what I hadn't realized I was missing. A modest house full of warmth, laughter, and the smell of home cooking. Her parents, Robert and Susan, welcomed me without a hint of judgment. Her younger brother, Matt, immediately started grilling me about boat engines. Her grandmother, Rose, who lived with them, insisted I take seconds of everything. It was like stepping into an episode of one of those 60s family sitcoms, the kind where problems were solved over pot roast and everyone genuinely liked each other. The contrast with my own family's cold dynamics couldn't have been more stark. "So you live on your boat?" Robert asked over dessert. Unlike my father's perpetual disapproval, his tone carried nothing but curiosity. "It's not conventional," I admitted, "but it's home." Robert nodded thoughtfully. "Conventional is overrated. I proposed to Susan on a sailboat during a thunderstorm. Everyone thought I was crazy, but 40 years later, here we are." After dinner, Emily showed me her studio, a converted garage filled with canvases, paints, and sketches of boats, including several clearly inspired by my Chris craft. On one wall hung a large frame quote, "When you do what you love, the world will find you." My grandmother's wisdom, Emily explained, noticing my attention on the quote. She's an artist who started when women weren't supposed to be. She always says that authentic passion is like a beacon. It draws the right people to you. Rose's philosophy resonated in a way that all my father's practical advice never had. Over the next few weeks, Emily became a regular presence in my videos. Her knowledge of wooden boats and restoration techniques took the content to a new level. Viewers loved her, both for her expertise and for the natural chemistry between us that was increasingly obvious on camera. The channel continued growing, reaching over 100,000 subscribers by June. The comments section exploded whenever Emily appeared, with viewers shipping us like characters in a TV show. It was embarrassing and flattering in equal measure. One evening, as we sat on the deck watching the sunset after a long day of filming, Emily pulled out her sketchbook and showed me something she'd been working on, marketing materials for boat tours. Vintage-style posters featuring my nearly restored Chris craft with the tagline Golden Wave Retro Tours. Cruise back to the 1950s. "I've been thinking," she said, eyes bright with excitement. "Once the boat is fully restored, you could offer nostalgic cruises along the coast. Sunset tours with 50s music, cocktail cruises, private events. People would pay good money for an authentic vintage experience like that." The idea hit me like a revelation. I'd been so focused on the restoration itself, I hadn't thought much about what came after. Emily's concept was perfect. It honored the boat's history and grandpa's spirit while creating something sustainable for the future. We stayed up half the night developing the concept, sketching ideas, and researching permits and requirements. By dawn, we had a business plan drafted for Golden Wave Retro Tours, named after the gold-tinted wake the boat created at sunset, one of Grandpa's favorite sites. 2 weeks later, with Emily's help, I filed the paperwork to register the business. That afternoon, we celebrated on the boat with champagne and vintage glasses, while Elvis crooned, "Can't Help Falling in Love," from the record player. As we toasted to our new venture, I looked at Emily, her eyes reflecting the golden light of sunset, her smile brighter than any future I'd previously imagined for myself, and had a moment of perfect clarity. My grandfather hadn't just left me a boat. He'd somehow orchestrated this entire journey, leading me exactly where I needed to be. "Grandpa, did you send her to me?" I thought, smiling at the idea of him pulling strings from beyond, making sure I wasn't alone in this adventure. Emily caught my expression. "What are you thinking about with that smile?" "Just that when you follow your heart, sometimes the universe conspires to help you out," I replied, remembering how many seemingly random events had led to this moment: inheriting the boat, getting kicked out of the family, starting the YouTube channel, meeting Emily at the farmer's market. Perhaps the most valuable thing Grandpa had given me wasn't the boat itself, but the courage to choose my own path, even when everyone else thought I was making a mistake. That old wooden vessel hadn't just given me a place to live or an unexpected career. It had led me to someone who saw value in the things others dismissed as worthless, including, perhaps, me. As the sun dipped below the horizon, casting the harbor in shades of orange and gold, Emily leaned her head against my shoulder and said quietly, "You know, most people spend their whole lives trying to find their purpose. You inherited yours." I couldn't help but think she was right. What had started as a promise to my grandfather had somehow become the foundation for a whole new life, one filled with possibility, purpose, and unexpected love. The grand opening of Golden Wave Retro Tours happened on a perfect July evening, exactly 1 year after I'd inherited Grandpa's boat. The restoration wasn't 100% complete. These old wooden boats are never truly finished. But she was seaworthy, beautiful, and ready for her second act. We kept the original name my grandfather had given her, Time Capsule. It seemed more fitting than ever. Our marketing strategy was simple but effective. Emily's vintage-style posters appeared in local shops, restaurants, and hotels. Our YouTube channel, now with over 300,000 subscribers, served as both advertising and proof of the boat's authentic restoration. The before and after transformation attracted people who'd been following our journey for months, eager to experience the boat in person. For our inaugural cruise, we invited marina neighbors, local business owners, and of course, Emily's family. As the sun began its descent toward the horizon, I stood on the dock beside my gleaming Chris craft, wearing Grandpa's old captain's hat and a vintage-inspired outfit Emily had helped me select, rolled-up sleeves, high-waisted pants, and boat shoes that would have looked right at home in a 1950s catalog. The evening exceeded all expectations. Guests boarded to the sounds of Buddy Holly, and the Platters playing through the restored sound system. Emily had decorated the boat with subtle 1950s touches, vintage life preservers, period-appropriate signal flags, and framed photos of Southern California coastal scenes from the era. We served classic cocktails in replica glassware. As we cruised along the coast, the golden California sunset, creating the perfect backdrop. Looking around at the smiling faces, watching Emily charm our guests with stories about the boat's history, I felt a wave of gratitude so powerful it nearly knocked me off my feet. Just a year ago, I'd been a family disappointment, the guy who couldn't get his act together. Now I was captaining my own business, quite literally steering my own course. Word spread quickly about our unique experience. TripAdvisor reviews raved about the authentic time travel and perfect nostalgia trip. Local media picked up the story. First the Oceanside paper, then San Diego lifestyle magazines, and finally a feature in Sunset magazine that described our tours as the most innovative coastal experience in Southern California. Bookings poured in faster than we could handle them. What had started as a weekend side business quickly demanded our full attention. Within 2 months, we had to hire staff. First, just weekend help, then a small full-time crew of young, enthusiastic people who shared our appreciation for vintage Americana and quality customer experiences. The crew took to calling me Captain Retro behind my back. I pretended to be annoyed, but secretly loved it. After a lifetime of being defined by my relation to others, Richard's disappointing son, Tom's less successful brother, I've finally become my own person with my own identity, even if that identity came with a slightly ridiculous nickname. As summer turned to fall, we expanded our offerings beyond simple sunset cruises. Emily suggested themed events, vinyl record listening parties, Mad Men-style cocktail cruises, even swing dance lessons on the larger evening tours. Each new idea attracted different clientele, from nostalgic retirees to trendy millennials seeking Instagram-worthy experiences. One crisp October evening, as we were closing up after a particularly successful corporate charter, a well-dressed man in his 50s approached the dock. He introduced himself as Michael Harrington, a location scout for Paramount Pictures. They were producing a period film set in 1950s California and were looking for authentic vehicles and settings. "Your boat is exactly what the director has been searching for," he explained, handing me his card. "We'd like to discuss using it as a featured setting in several key scenes. The compensation would be substantial, of course." 2 weeks later, I found myself signing contracts with actual Hollywood lawyers. The studio wanted exclusive use of Time Capsule for 3 months of filming. January through March, our slowest season anyway. The payment they offered was staggering. $150,000, plus insurance coverage and a restoration touch-up after filming concluded. When I called Emily to share the news, there was a long silence on the other end of the line. "Are you still there?" I asked, concerned by her lack of reaction. "I'm trying to process the fact that your grandfather's worthless boat just landed a Hollywood contract," she finally replied. "This is the kind of vindication most people only dream about." The film, titled Golden Coast, starred some of Hollywood's biggest names in a romantic drama set along the California shoreline in 1957. During pre-production meetings, I met the director, an Academy Award nominee known for his meticulous attention to historical detail. He spent hours asking me questions about the boat's original features, insisting that nothing be modified to make filming easier. Shooting began in January. For 3 surreal months, I watched A-list actors walk the same deck, where I'd spent countless hours sanding and varnishing. The boat I'd lived on when I was at my lowest became the glamorous setting for pivotal scenes in what the industry was already buzzing might be an Oscar contender. My role during filming was essentially that of a highly specialized boat operator and technical consultant. I piloted time capsule during sailing scenes, advised on how period-accurate boating would look, and occasionally fetched coffee when things got hectic. The experience was simultaneously humbling and affirming. My boat was a star, not me, and that felt exactly right. My boat got to work with George Clooney. I joked to Emily during a rare evening off. Me? I held coffee for the assistant's assistant. She laughed, but then grew serious. "You know what's amazing? You're the only person on that entire set who's there because of something you built yourself, not because someone hired you." Emily's observation stuck with me. In Hollywood's hierarchy, I was nobody, just a boat guy. But that boat represented something I'd fought for, something I'd chosen over family approval, financial security, and the conventional path. That made me different from everyone else on set, even the stars. When filming wrapped in late March, the production team hosted a small party on and around time capsule. The director made a toast, thanking me for preserving a piece of Americana that made our film possible. One of the lead actors, an older gentleman with serious industry clout, pulled me aside afterward. "I grew up on a boat just like this one," he told me, swirling his drink reflectively. "My father sold it when I was 12. I've regretted not buying it from him ever since." He handed me his personal card. "If you ever decide to sell, call me first. But I hope you don't. Some things are worth more than money." With the Hollywood check clearing the bank, Golden Wave Retro Tours entered a new phase. Emily and I spent weeks researching other vintage boats similar to Time Capsule. We eventually found a 1948 Wheeler Playmate, not identical to our Chris Craft, but similar in style and era, being sold by an aging owner in Santa Barbara who could no longer maintain it. The Wheeler needed work, but nothing compared to Time Capsule's original condition. With our combined restoration experience and YouTube following, we documented the entire process, creating a whole new series that attracted even more viewers. By June, we had 2 fully operational vintage boats and doubled our tour capacity. With the second boat, we launched a new business segment that neither of us had anticipated: wedding services. It started when a longtime YouTube subscriber reached out, asking if they could hold their small wedding ceremony on Time Capsule. The vintage aesthetic, they explained, perfectly matched their vision. That first wedding was so successful and photographed so extensively for social media that inquiries began flooding in. We developed a specific wedding package: ceremony on the water at sunset, vintage-themed reception, and photography that captured the timeless quality of celebrating on a piece of floating history. By our second summer in business, Golden Wave Retro Tours was employing 12 people, operating 7 days a week, and had been featured in national travel magazines. Our YouTube channel surpassed 1 million subscribers, with viewers tuning in from around the world to watch our restoration projects and business adventures. Through it all, Emily remained my partner, co-captain, and creative heart of the operation. Her artistic eye transformed our business materials. Her genuine warmth made every customer feel special, and her practical business sense kept us from making rookie entrepreneur mistakes. Without her, Golden Wave would have been just a boat tour. With her, it became an experience. On particularly beautiful evenings, when the sunset painted the water in shades of gold and amber, the golden wave that gave our company its name, I'd sometimes find myself at the wheel, overwhelmed by how drastically my life had changed. In those moments, I could almost feel Grandpa standing beside me, his weather hand on my shoulder, nodding in approval. Dreams don't get old if you keep them alive, he used to tell me. I finally understood what he meant. His dream of freedom on the water hadn't died with him. It had evolved, transformed, and found new life through me. Perhaps that's the only real immortality any of us can hope for, the continuation of our passions through those who come after us. For our company's first anniversary, I planned something special. We closed bookings for the evening and took time capsule out with just Emily and me aboard. I prepared her favorite foods, chilled her preferred wine, and queued up a playlist of music spanning from the 1950s to today, a soundtrack of the old and new coming together, just like us. As we drifted along the coast, the setting sun turning everything to gold, I finally asked a question I'd been rehearsing for weeks. Kneeling on the same deck I'd rebuilt with my own hands, I looked up at the woman who believed in me and my seemingly foolish dream. "Will you sail away with me? Forever?" I asked, presenting a vintage ring I'd found that reminded me of something from her paintings. Delicate gold with a small sapphire the color of ocean water. Emily laughed, that bright, genuine laugh I'd fallen in love with, and responded with the perfect blend of sentiment and humor that defined her. "Only if you promise to stop singing along with Elvis. But yes, 1,000 times yes." As we embraced on the gently rocking deck, with the coast of Southern California stretching out before us and the open Pacific beyond, I couldn't help but think about the journey that had brought me here. From family disappointment to successful entrepreneur. From lonely and lost to found and loved. From a man defined by others' expectations to someone who had finally discovered his own path. All because an old man had loved his boat enough to pass it on to the one person who might love it just as much. The years following my proposal to Emily passed in a whirlwind of growth, both personal and professional. We married in a small ceremony on time capsule, with Emily's family, our crew, and a handful of close friends in attendance. No one from my side came. The invitations I'd sent to my parents and Tom had gone unanswered. I told myself it didn't matter, that I had created my own family now. But some wounds leave scars that ache during life's biggest moments. Golden Wave Retro Tours expanded beyond anything I could have imagined when I was sleeping on that leaky boat and stretching my last dollars. We added a third vintage boat to our fleet, then a fourth. We hired marketing professionals, accountants, and a full-time maintenance crew. What had started as a desperate attempt to honor my grandfather's memory had transformed into a thriving enterprise employing over 30 people. By our third year, we'd opened a second location in Santa Barbara. By the fourth, we added San Francisco to our operations. The Golden Wave brand became synonymous with luxury nostalgia experiences up and down the California coast. Our waiting list for weekend tours stretched months in advance, and our wedding packages commanded premium prices that would have seemed impossible just a few years earlier. Our YouTube channel continued to grow alongside the business, evolving from simple restoration videos to a lifestyle brand celebrating vintage Americana. Emily's artistic influence elevated our content, attracting partnerships with major brands seeking to tap into the authentic retro aesthetic we'd cultivated. We regularly declined reality TV show offers. Some things weren't for sale, including our private lives. I rarely thought about my family anymore. The pain of their rejection had dulled, replaced by the satisfaction of proving them wrong through success rather than confrontation. Emily's family had become my own. Her father teaching me to fish in a way that reminded me of Grandpa, her mother sending care packages when we were too busy to cook, her grandmother Rose dispensing wisdom that kept me grounded when success threatened to change who I was. As our 5th anniversary approached, 5 years since that first sunset cruise on the newly restored time capsule, Emily suggested we throw a proper celebration, not just for us, but for everyone who had contributed to our journey. Employees, loyal customers, YouTube followers, marina friends who supported me when I was just that crazy guy living on a rotting boat. We planned an extravagant evening. All 4 boats docked together at our original Oceanside location, transformed with vintage decorations and twinkling lights. We hired a live band specializing in 1950s classics and Elvis covers. We arranged for classic cars from the era to be displayed along the dock. We sent invitations to hundreds of people who had touched our lives over the years. 2 weeks before the event, I received an email that stopped me in my tracks. It was from my brother Tom, the first contact from my family in nearly 5 years. The message was brief. Saw the article in Forbes. Dad has been following your success too. We'd like to come to your anniversary event, if that's okay. The Forbes article had been published the previous month, a feature naming me one of their 40 under 40 entrepreneurs, with a headline Captain of the American Dream, How Zach Russell Turned Nostalgia into Gold. The piece detailed my journey from disowned son to successful business owner, complete with professional photos of Emily and me on time capsule. I'd sent copies to my family, not expecting a response. I showed Emily the email, my emotions a tangled mess of anger, hope, vindication, and lingering hurt. "What do you want to do?" she asked, always careful to let me navigate my family complications in my own way. After a long pause, I replied, "I want them to see what we built." The night of the celebration arrived. Perfect weather, as if even the elements were acknowledging our milestone. Hundreds of guests filled the marina, spilling across our boats and the surrounding docks. The band played, cocktails flowed, and the golden California sunset cast everything in that magical light that had inspired our company name. I spent the evening moving through the crowd, shaking hands, accepting congratulations, and introducing Emily to people who knew our story only through the lens of social media. I kept glancing toward the entrance, both dreading and anticipating the arrival of my family. When I had nearly convinced myself they wouldn't come, I spotted them, my father, mother, and Tom, standing awkwardly at the edge of the celebration. Time seemed to slow as I made my way toward them. My father had aged more than the 5 years warranted. His once commanding presence diminished, his shoulders slightly stooped. My mother looked nervous, clutching her purse like a shield. Tom, ever the chameleon, wore an expression carefully balanced between confidence and contrition. I stopped a few feet away, suddenly unsure what to do. In movies, this would be the moment for a dramatic confrontation or a tearful reunion. In reality, we just stood there, separated by more than physical distance, separated by years of silence and the fundamentally different people we had become. My father broke the stalemate first. In all my imagined scenarios of this moment, I never expected what happened next. His eyes welled with tears, and he spoke in a voice so unlike his usual authoritative tone that I barely recognized it. "I thought you had lost everything," he said, gesturing around the celebration, the boats, the success so evident in every direction. "But you won it all, just differently than I imagined." Tom stepped forward, his typical polish cracking with genuine emotion. "I was jealous of you," he admitted. "All these years, I did everything right, everything expected, and I've never built anything that was truly mine. You had the courage I didn't." The words I'd longed to hear for years landed like stones in still water, rippling through my consciousness. My mother simply opened her arms, and I found myself stepping into her embrace, feeling like both a child and a man who had traveled too far to return unchanged. Over her shoulder, I caught Emily's eye across the crowd. She nodded encouragingly, giving me the space to have this moment that belonged solely to my first family. After the initial awkwardness passed, I gave them a tour of Time Capsule, the boat they once called a worthless piece of junk, now the flagship of a multi-million-dollar business. I showed them the original elements I preserved, the improvements I'd made, and the vintage details that our clients paid premium prices to experience. My father ran his hand along the teak railing, the same one I'd spent weeks sanding and refinishing. "Your grandfather always said this boat would amount to something special," he admitted quietly. "I thought he was just being sentimental." "He was," I replied, "but that doesn't mean he was wrong." The conversation wasn't perfect. Too many years and hurts separated us for instant healing. But as they prepared to leave, I surprised myself by saying, "You should come back sometime. Maybe actually take one of our tours." I managed a small smile, finding unexpected humor in the situation. "You'll have to buy tickets, though. We're usually booked solid." Watching them walk away, I felt a strange sense of peace settle over me. The success was satisfying, of course. What rejected kid doesn't dream of showing the people who dismissed them just how wrong they were? But the real victory wasn't the money or accolades. It was in discovering that their approval, one so desperately important to me, was now just a pleasant bonus rather than a necessary validation. Later that night, after the guests had gone and we were cleaning up, I told Emily about the conversation. My dad apologized. I said, still processing the reality of it. It's official, pigs are flying. She laughed, then grew serious. Are you okay? With them coming back into your life after everything. I considered her question carefully. Forgiveness isn't really for them, I said finally. It's for me. Carrying that anger was exhausting, and I don't need it anymore. The realization felt like setting down a heavy backpack I'd been carrying for so long I'd forgotten it was there. In the weeks following the anniversary celebration, my family and I established a cautious new relationship, not the close-knit bond portrayed in heartwarming movies, but respectful reconnection between adults who shared history but had chosen different paths. My father even referred some potential business investors our way, a practical olive branch that suited his nature. 6 months after our reconciliation, Emily and I made a major personal decision. After years of living in various apartments near our expanding business locations, we purchased a house. A beautiful mid-century modern home perched on a bluff overlooking the ocean in Oceanside, just a mile from the marina where Time Capsule was docked. The house was perfect. Large windows capturing the ocean view, an open floor plan ideal for entertaining, and a separate studio where Emily could paint when inspiration struck. We filled it with a careful blend of authentic vintage pieces and modern comforts, creating a space that reflected our business aesthetic and personal style. Yet something unexpected happened. Despite the comfort and luxury of our new home, Emily and I often found ourselves gravitating back to Time Capsule in the evenings. We'd pack a simple dinner, grab a bottle of wine, and spend the night on the boat, sleeping in the cabin despite having a king-size bed waiting at home. Why do we keep coming back here? Emily asked one night, as we sat on the deck under a blanket of stars. We have a beautiful house with actual plumbing and space to stretch out. I thought about it, watching the moonlight play across the gentle waves. Because this is where our story began. Houses come and go, but this boat, this is our foundation. On one such evening, our 5th wedding anniversary, we took Time Capsule out for a private cruise. Just the two of us, just like that night I proposed. The coast of Southern California stretched out before us, golden in the setting sun. As darkness fell and stars emerged, I stood at the wheel with Emily beside me, overwhelmed by how far we'd come. Sometimes I still can't believe this is our life, I said, gesturing around us. 5 years ago I was sleeping on this boat because I had nowhere else to go. Emily leaned her head against my shoulder, and now people pay thousands to spend a few hours on it. As we drifted under the stars, I thought about my grandfather, his weathered hands on the same wheel, his gravelly laugh echoing across the water. I imagined him watching us from somewhere, witnessing how his beloved boat had transformed not just my life, but the lives of everyone it touched. We did it, Grandpa, I whispered to the night sky. We really did it. The business continued to grow, expanding to new locations and ventures. My relationship with my family slowly healed, never returning to what had been, but evolving into something perhaps more honest. Emily and I started discussing children. Future captains who inherit not just boats and businesses, but the legacy of following your heart despite what others think is practical. Looking back on the journey that began with a grieving grandson making a promise over supposedly worthless inheritance, I understand now what Grandpa knew all along. Some things can't be valued in dollars and cents. Some treasures look like junk to everyone, but the person meant to discover them. And sometimes, what seems like the end of everything is actually just the beginning of something far greater than you ever imagined. They laughed at Grandpa's old boat, but I turned it into my $1 million dream. More importantly, I turned it into a life worth living. Not because of success or money, but because I found the courage to steer my own course, even when every safe harbor was closed to me. That, I think, is what Grandpa really wanted me to inherit. Not just a boat, but the freedom it represented.